There was a Harvard-Harris poll done this month, April of 2020, asking the American people, how many of you believe that the Steele dossier was true and that Trump really colluded with the Russians? So, this has been debunked in 1,000 ways. We've been over it many times. But 53%, 53% of Americans polled said they agreed that the dossier was real, was true, and that Trump had colluded with the Russians. And I start the show out today with this poll to make the point that you may wonder why all of these fake news stories that we talk about in the show, and then they get exposed, and you can go to the very sources, you can prove data, you can get eyewitness, whatever it is you get facts that are indisputable that debunk these kind of fake stories. But the media keeps running headlines. The media keeps putting them out there. And you might wonder why. And the answer is because for some segment of America, they work. This is why. This is why the media continue to run the Trump-Russia collusion story as a headline, as a presumption, even though we had debunking of it in a million different ways. So I'll just mention a few ways, just this Trump-Russia thing. Obviously, the big story today, we'll get to it very soon, is the big news that came out of Washington, D.C., where some notes made by top FBI officials prove exactly what Sidney Powell, the attorney for Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, has been saying all along. He was set up, he was framed. The entire Trump-Russia collusion was a hoax. But in this first five, I want to get at the point of how powerful it appears that lies perpetuated and repeated by the media actually penetrate and convince a certain number of people who then cannot be convinced of the truth when it's staring them in the face. With respect in particular to this poll, this idea, this Harris poll pointing out that claiming that 53% of Americans say they still believe the Trump-Russia collusion hoax, they still believe the Steele dossier. This is inspired by the fact there was an Inspector General report, 478 pages, an Inspector General, a neutral person, trying to say, I did my job, I looked into it, and as an example, the Inspector General said, prior to and during the pendency of the FISA, the warrants issued, the FBI was unable to corroborate any of the specific substantive allegations against Carter Page contained in the election reporting and relied on in the FISA applications. So that whole thing that they went into going to FISA court for Carter Page, the FBI could not corroborate one of them, not one of them. Also, the Inspector General pointing out much of the material in the Steele election reports, including allegations about Donald Trump, members of the Trump campaign, relied upon in the Carter Page FISA applications, could not be corroborated. They just made up stuff, as we now know, but you can go on. There's a great article posted at our website, americacanwetalk.org. It runs through the specific ways in which the entire dossier has been debunked. The entire notion of the Trump-Russia collusion has been, despite millions of dollars and thousands of deposition hours and interviews of witnesses, there is nothing to it except the left-wing dream that somehow they can make the American people believe it. So on my website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage under shows, drop down under list of links, you can read this piece that talks about the study. But I want to get one other thing, closing out the first five, that relate to how much America was harmed by the continuing lies of the American left about the Russia collusion, non-existent Russia collusion. It's now become clear, and there's a brilliant piece out by Fred Fleitz, who is he's the head of the Center for Security Policy. Prior to that, he held the position of CIA, he was a CIA officer and National Security Council Chief of Staff, wrote that through his interviews with Senate Intelligence Committee members, people preparing these reports, it has become clear that John Brennan, head of the CIA, the guy who appears in many people's speculation to be the person who concocted and orchestrated the entire Trump collusion hoax, the Russia collusion hoax, that he, John Brennan, head of the CIA, was actively working to discredit, to ignore, to just refuse to acknowledge and report the fact that what was really happening, the intelligence was showing, was that Russia wanted Hillary Clinton to win. Russia was never on Trump's side to start with, which I've said in the show many times. Why would a formerly communist, still socialist country like Russia ever want an America-loving guy to win the presidency? There's nothing about Trump that the Russians would have liked. Everything about Hillary that the Russians would love. She's a lefty, just like they are. And I want to close out the first five by making this point. I'm talking today about how dangerous it is that left-wing media in this country gets a hold of their, people get tired of the word narrative, whatever word you want to use, gets a hold of storylines, decisions they've made about what they want the public to believe, and they repeat and they repeat and they repeat them. So even when they've been completely debunked, completely disproved, you cannot get the American people or some significant portion of the American people to wake up, to read the truth and realize, oh, I was faked out. I was duped. I didn't know that. The media is counting on that kind of ignorance of the American people, their ability to lead the American people along in order to get the American people to go along with the left-wing agenda the media supports. In this particular case, the whole story of the Trump-Russia collusion, which it has as a portion of it the Flynn prosecution, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn prosecution, the left needed America to believe that the Trump presidency was illegitimate because it then justified their ongoing attacks on the Trump presidency, their determination to undermine him, belittle him, delegitimize him. This was the effort of the Democrat media mob in this country. As we turn our attention a little later in the show to where we are with respect to the coronavirus, the same phenomenon is happening. The media is so dedicated to and has inundated the airwaves with descriptions of the danger of this virus. They've scared America to death that we are willing to, they hope and they think, go along with the surrender of our civil liberties, the surrender of our freedom, the surrender of our privacy, all because they have scared us to death. Because you have American people who read these blaring, large print headlines about the number of people who passed on from coronavirus. And the answer they want the American people to give back to the government is, okay, tell us what we have to do to be safe. Anything you say. We'll do anything you say. We'll surrender our freedom, our liberties. We'll do exactly what you say. Just make us safe. This was the mission of many in the Democrat media mob left, to have Americans so frightened about the virus that any attack on our civil liberties was not only accepted, it was greeted with praise and thanks and applause. We are at a dangerous time in this country because where the left is headed with the coronavirus and with the policies they are advocating to put in place to deal with the coronavirus, we are surrendering the very notion, the very unique, extraordinary notion of what America was as founded. All of this would be very different. I want to tell you why I think, going back to the Michael Flynn story and the idea that 53% of Americans still think that Trump colluded with Russia. Imagine the difference in our country if 80% of Americans, 90% of Americans actually knew the facts. So they knew that the Trump-Russia collusion was a hoax cooked up by the left. They know that a hoax cooked up by the CIA, John Brennan, FBI, DOJ, big-time officials in our national law enforcement agencies. Imagine if 80 or 90% of Americans realized they made this stuff up. They lied to us. They covered for each other because they wanted to have America despise, delegitimize, refuse to support President Trump. Imagine the difference in our conversation and where we'd be headed in this country if more Americans understood how radically they were manipulated by the left in this entire Trump-Russia collusion story, and how differently people in America today might be greeting the oncoming, the just unbelievable oncoming surrender of our civil liberties out of the left, how differently people react if they said, wait a minute, aren't these a lot of the same media sources that told me that there was Trump-Russia collusion and they lied to me? You'd have more ability, more willingness on the part of the American people to question what the left is pushing in response to the coronavirus. People would push back more if they had more comprehension and awareness that we were duped by these same characters on the left in this country in the Trump-Russia collusion hoax, and that today they'd be more skeptical about what the left is now pushing in response to the coronavirus. And that, my friends, is today's First Five.